It was a sunny afternoon when Officer Marcus King boarded Flight 1327 from New York to Washington, D.C. He was dressed in plain clothes, just like any other traveler, though his sharp eyes and calm demeanor revealed a deeper story. Marcus wasn't just any passenger. He was an experienced police officer, currently working undercover for the FBI. But today, he wasn't thinking about his work. He was simply looking forward to a few quiet hours in the air. The plane was filled with passengers, the soft murmur of their conversations filling the cabin. People adjusted their seats, opened their snacks, and some even leaned back to relax. Everything seemed normal. Until Marcus caught the eye of a flight attendant who was walking down the aisle, checking on passengers. Her name was Clara, and she had already been having a rough day. As she passed by, she gave Marcus a quick glance before moving on to the next row. At first, he didn't think much of it, but when Clara walked back past him, something changed. She stopped right in front of Marcus, blocking his path to the overhead compartment. "Is there something I can help you with?" Clara asked, her voice a bit sharper than necessary. Marcus, being polite, smiled and replied, "No, just adjusting my bag." Clara raised an eyebrow, looking at him closely. "It doesn't seem like you're adjusting anything," she said, her voice now tinged with suspicion. "You're just sitting there." Marcus felt a moment of confusion, but quickly regained his calm. "I'm just trying to relax. It's a long flight." Clara didn't seem convinced. She glanced around the cabin, her eyes scanning the faces of the other passengers. There was something about her attitude, sharp and quick to judge, that caught Marcus off guard. It wasn't just the tone of her voice, but the way she was looking at him, as if she expected trouble. "I'll be back in a few minutes," Clara said curtly, and then walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the cabin floor. Marcus shrugged it off. After all, flight attendants were known for being strict about rules, especially when passengers weren't following instructions. But something about Clara's behavior stayed with him. He tried to ignore it and turned back to the window, staring out at the clouds. The hum of the airplane's engines filled the silence as he let his mind drift. But it didn't take long for Clara to return. This time, she wasn't alone. Two other flight attendants were with her, and they were talking quietly as they approached Marcus. As they reached him, Clara spoke again, her voice colder than before. "Excuse me, sir," she said, "but I need you to leave the plane. You're being disruptive." Marcus' eyes widened in surprise. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said calmly. "I'm just sitting here." Clara didn't seem to care. "You need to leave now," she insisted. "We don't tolerate behavior like this on our flights." The other flight attendants stood there, looking unsure but not saying a word. Passengers around Marcus were starting to notice the tension, but no one spoke up. The atmosphere in the cabin seemed to shift, and Marcus felt a rush of confusion and disbelief. "Please, just let me stay," Marcus said, trying to reason with her. "I'm not causing any trouble." But Clara was already shaking her head, her mind set. "No, leave the plane now," she ordered. Marcus stared at Clara, trying to understand what was happening. The other passengers were looking on, some whispering to each other, but no one said a word. He had never been in a situation like this before. He wasn't a troublemaker, and he had done nothing wrong. He was just a man trying to get through a long flight in peace. But Clara wasn't backing down. "I'm asking you nicely," she said, her voice harsh now. "Leave the plane. You can't stay here if you're going to act like this." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. This wasn't just about a seatbelt or a drink. She was demanding he leave the plane as if he were causing some kind of problem. He couldn't understand why she was being so firm about it. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to listen to him. He took a deep breath and stood up slowly, trying to keep his calm. He didn't want to cause a scene, but he also didn't want to be thrown off a flight for no reason. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady. "You've misunderstood something." Clara gave him a sharp look, clearly irritated by his refusal. "I've had enough of this," she muttered, and then she turned to the other flight attendants, who were standing behind her, watching the situation unfold. "Security!" Clara shouted, as if her voice alone could force the situation into submission. "Someone get security, now." Marcus felt the eyes of the passengers on him. He could feel the weight of their gazes, some curious, some uncertain, but most just uncomfortable. It was as if the entire plane had suddenly shifted, and he was the reason why. Within moments, 2 security officers appeared at the front of the cabin. They were calm and collected, but Marcus could see that they were taking their cues from Clara. He could feel his stomach tighten, but he didn't let it show. He was used to difficult situations, but this one felt different. The security officers approached him, and Clara pointed directly at him. "This man is causing trouble," she said firmly. "I need him removed from the flight immediately." The 2 security officers glanced at Marcus, then back at each other. One of them stepped forward and spoke to him. "Sir, we need you to follow us off the plane. Please cooperate." Marcus was taken aback. This was escalating quickly, and he wasn't sure how to de-escalate it without making the situation worse. He could feel his patience wearing thin. "I'm not going anywhere," he said again, his voice quieter, but more determined this time. "You don't understand. I'm not causing trouble. I'm just trying to do my job." The security officers seemed confused, but they didn't argue. They exchanged glances before one of them reached for Marcus's bag. "I'm going to need to take you off the plane," the officer said, his voice calm but firm. Marcus stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had a job to do, and this situation was not helping. The last thing he wanted was to cause even more of a scene, but it was clear that Clara had made up her mind, and there was no changing it. With a heavy sigh, Marcus gathered his belongings and walked slowly toward the plane's exit. The security officers followed him closely, and Clara stood behind them, watching him go. Her face was set, determined to make sure he left. As Marcus stepped off the plane and onto the tarmac, he couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. How had things gotten this far? He hadn't done anything to deserve this treatment, yet there he was, standing outside, watching the plane he was supposed to be on pull away. Marcus stood on the tarmac, feeling the cold air against his skin as the plane's engines hummed in the distance. The door to the plane had slammed shut behind him, and the airplane slowly began to taxi away, carrying the other passengers to their destination. He couldn't believe it. Just a few moments ago, he had been sitting peacefully in his seat, not bothering anyone. Now he was standing outside in the open air, removed from the flight for no reason at all. The weight of the situation sank in. His mission was important. And now, because of one flight attendant's poor decision, everything had gone wrong. A couple of airline staff members appeared from a nearby entrance. They looked at Marcus but didn't approach him immediately. They were probably wondering what had just happened, just like everyone else on the plane. The passengers were now free to settle into their seats, but Marcus knew that many of them had seen him escorted off, and the news would likely spread. He could already imagine the whispers, the side glances, a black man being removed from a flight, with security escorting him off the plane, couldn't help but raise questions. Some might think he was guilty of something. Others would wonder if he had been mistreated. In the distance, he saw Clara talking to another crew member, likely explaining why she had kicked him off the plane. He felt a flush of anger rise in his chest. Why had she assumed the worst? Why hadn't she taken the time to ask him who he was before making such a rash decision? His fingers tightened into fists, but he quickly relaxed them, trying to calm himself. He couldn't afford to lose his cool. He was a trained officer, an FBI agent, and he needed to act with the same professionalism that he always did, even in the face of such a confusing and unfair situation. The seconds stretched into minutes, and soon, a young airline employee approached Marcus with an apology in hand. "Sir, I'm very sorry for what happened," she said, her voice soft. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Marcus glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He had no interest in her apologies. She wasn't the one who had caused this mess. It was Clara, the flight attendant who had wrongly judged him. And now he had to deal with the consequences. "I understand," Marcus replied quietly. "But that doesn't change what just happened. I didn't deserve this." The young employee nodded, but there was little she could do. She offered him a seat in a small lounge area near the gate, hoping to make him more comfortable. Marcus reluctantly agreed, though it felt strange to be sitting there. He wasn't a regular passenger. He wasn't someone who needed to wait for another flight. He had been a part of something far bigger than this. As he sat, he couldn't help but replay the scene in his head. Clara's face had been so sure, so certain that she was right to kick him off. He had tried to explain, tried to make her understand, but it hadn't worked. He had been dismissed, just like that. What bothered him even more was that no one had spoken up. No one had tried to stop it. Passengers had just watched the whole thing happen, as if they were waiting for someone else to say something. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one dared to raise their voice. The flight attendant had made a snap judgment, and it had cost him dearly. But there was one thing Marcus knew for sure. This wasn't the end of it. He would find a way to clear things up, to make sure Clara understood the mistake she had made. Marcus sat quietly in the small lounge area near the gate, waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a mistake that could have serious consequences. As he sat there, a young woman in a uniform approached him. She was holding a tablet and seemed nervous, but there was an apologetic look on her face. "Sir, I'm so sorry for the confusion," she said, her voice gentle. "I've just been informed that the flight attendant who asked you to leave, well, she didn't know who you were." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised by her words. "What do you mean? What do you mean she didn't know who I was?" The woman hesitated for a moment before answering. "She didn't know you were an FBI agent." Marcus sat up straighter. His eyes narrowed. An FBI agent. He almost couldn't believe what he was hearing. "She kicked me off because she didn't recognize me." "For real?" The young woman nodded slowly. "I'm afraid so. Apparently, the flight attendant thought you were causing trouble, but she didn't realize who you were. She's been given some additional training. But, well, we're still trying to figure out how this happened." Marcus let out a long breath, feeling a mix of disbelief and frustration. "I've been a law enforcement officer for years, and this is how I'm treated." He shook his head, feeling the sting of embarrassment creeping into his chest. The woman seemed genuinely sorry for what had happened. "I understand how you feel, sir. It's just, well, it's difficult sometimes. We get so caught up in making sure passengers follow the rules that we sometimes overlook the bigger picture." Marcus looked out the window at the planes lining up to take off. His mind was racing. He couldn't understand how Clara had failed to notice the signs. An undercover agent didn't wear a badge that was easily seen, but there were plenty of clues. His posture, his calm demeanor, his behavior. But she had jumped to conclusions too quickly. And now he was paying the price. "I'm not looking for an apology," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "I just want to know why she didn't ask first. Why didn't she just take a minute to find out who I was before making this a bigger issue?" The young woman nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "We've been informed that she's been under a lot of stress lately, and she's had some previous issues with passengers. I'm sure she wasn't trying to cause trouble, but, well, sometimes these things happen." Marcus rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. This wasn't about stress or personal issues. This was about professional behavior. The airline had to hold its staff accountable, and he wasn't going to let this go. "Thank you," he said, standing up and gathering his things. "I'll be speaking to someone about this. It's not about getting even, but about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The young woman nodded and stepped aside as Marcus walked toward the counter. He wasn't angry anymore, not at her anyway. But Clara's mistake had shaken him. It had exposed a flaw in the system, and now it was his job to make sure it was fixed. As he left the lounge area and headed toward the exit, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just begun to uncover something much bigger than an unfortunate misunderstanding. This was only the beginning. As Marcus stepped out of the airport and into the cool evening air, he took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. He had been taken off the plane without cause, and now he was left to deal with the aftermath. He couldn't let it go, not without taking action. He pulled out his phone and made a call to his supervisor at the FBI, Agent Daniels. After a few rings, the line clicked. "Marcus, what happened?" Agent Daniels' voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the concern in his tone. "I've got a situation," Marcus replied, his voice calm. "I was kicked off a flight, and the flight attendant didn't even know who I was. She thought I was a troublemaker." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice more serious. "Marcus, are you okay? What exactly happened?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, his frustration growing. "But it doesn't make sense. I'm an undercover agent. I was traveling on a mission, and she removed me from the plane without asking any questions. No one even tried to figure out who I was before making a decision." Daniels let out a sigh. "We need to get to the bottom of this. If she didn't recognize you as an agent, then this could be a problem. You're going to have to come down to the office and file a report." Marcus agreed. He knew the next steps were important. The mistake was more than just personal. If flight attendants didn't know how to identify federal agents, it could put the entire operation at risk. As Marcus drove to the FBI office, he couldn't help but replay the events in his mind. The flight attendant had made a rash decision, one that had led to him being kicked off the plane. But what bothered him most was how she hadn't taken a moment to assess the situation properly. Why hadn't she asked? Why hadn't she just checked who he was? His thoughts were interrupted when he pulled into the FBI parking lot. He parked his car and walked into the building, where he was greeted by Agent Daniels, who was waiting for him in his office. "So, what's the next step?" Marcus asked, settling into a chair across from Daniels' desk. Daniels leaned back in his chair and looked at Marcus seriously. "We need to start by looking at how the airline trains its staff. They clearly missed something important, and that needs to be addressed. I want you to gather a report on what happened, and we'll take it from there." Marcus nodded, understanding the importance of the situation. It wasn't just about him anymore. If the flight attendants didn't know how to recognize agents, there could be serious consequences in the future. As he began to write up the report, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the airline, apologizing for the incident and offering him a free flight on their next available plane. It was a kind gesture, but it didn't solve the real issue. He couldn't just let this slide. Marcus clicked off the message and focused on his report. His professional instincts told him that this wasn't just a simple mistake, it was a warning. A reminder that even small misjudgments could have big consequences. As he wrote, he began to think about Clara, the flight attendant. He wondered if she even knew what she had done. Did she realize the weight of her actions? It was clear she hadn't recognized him, but there was more to it than just that. She had acted with authority, sure of herself, without knowing the full picture. And now, Marcus had to find a way to make sure something like this never happened again. The next day, Marcus sat at his desk in the FBI office, staring at the screen in front of him. He had completed his report about the incident, detailing everything that had happened on the plane. But his mind wasn't entirely on the work. He couldn't stop thinking about the flight attendant, Clara, and what had led to this situation. Had she known who he was, things would have gone much differently. But she hadn't, and that's what had made all the difference. Marcus knew it was a mistake, but he also understood that mistakes could be costly, especially in situations like this. As he sat there, deep in thought, his phone rang. He picked it up, expecting another call from his supervisor, but it wasn't Agent Daniels. It was someone from the airline. Marcus answered, his voice steady. Hello, this is Marcus King. Mr. King, this is Emily from the airline. I'm calling to personally apologize for the incident yesterday. We deeply regret what happened, and I wanted to reach out to you directly. Marcus sat up straighter. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he appreciated the call. Thank you for reaching out, Emily. I appreciate the apology. We've been informed of the situation, and we're taking it very seriously, Emily continued. We've already started an internal review, and Clara, the flight attendant involved, has been spoken to. We've offered her additional training, but I wanted to personally apologize for what happened. Marcus was silent for a moment. He could hear the sincerity in her voice, but it didn't take away the frustration he felt about how things had unfolded. I understand that mistakes happen, but this could have been avoided. Clara could have asked a few questions before making such a big decision. I know, Emily said softly. And Clara has admitted that she acted too quickly. She regrets what happened, and she's deeply sorry for the misunderstanding. This caught Marcus off guard. He hadn't expected to hear Clara apologize. She's sorry. Yes, Emily replied. She realizes now that she let her stress get the best of her. And she's learned from it. She didn't mean to cause any harm, but she understands the importance of recognizing situations like this in the future. Marcus took a deep breath, the tension in his chest easing slightly. It wasn't the apology he had been expecting, but it was enough. Clara had acknowledged her mistake, and that was something. Thank you for letting me know. I hope she learns from this. I'm not angry anymore, but it's important that this doesn't happen to anyone else. We're doing everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen, Emily assured him. Thank you for your understanding, Mr. King. As the call ended, Marcus put his phone down and leaned back in his chair. He couldn't help but feel a bit of relief. The situation wasn't as simple as it seemed, and there were no easy answers, but he had done what he needed to do. And now it was in the hands of the airline and their internal review. His mind wandered back to Clara. He could imagine her sitting in the break room, feeling a mix of regret and shame. She had acted out of stress, and that had led to a huge mistake. Marcus hoped she would use this experience to grow, not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. In the end, Marcus knew that even small mistakes could lead to big consequences, but they also offered the chance for growth and understanding. And sometimes, that's all anyone needed, an opportunity to make things right. The days following the incident were a whirlwind. Marcus had been kept busy with his usual work at the FBI, but the flight situation was always in the back of his mind. He had filed his report, and the airline had promised to investigate the matter thoroughly. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the issue wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger. The phone calls and emails from the airline continued to come in, each one offering more apologies and reassurance. They had implemented new procedures to prevent something like this from happening again, and they were taking the matter seriously. Yet Marcus couldn't help but feel uneasy. It wasn't just about Clara's mistake anymore. It was about the system that allowed such mistakes to occur in the first place. Meanwhile, the news of the incident began to spread. The story of a black man being removed from a flight by security officers had caught the attention of social media. And soon enough, the media picked up the story. There were mixed reactions, of course. Some people sympathized with Marcus, seeing the situation as an unfortunate misunderstanding, while others saw it as a failure of the airline to properly train its staff. The discussion sparked debates about racial profiling, the responsibilities of flight attendants, and the importance of recognizing authority figures in everyday situations. Marcus was aware of the attention the story had received, but he chose not to comment publicly. His focus remained on ensuring that the incident didn't happen again, and he knew that raising his voice in the media wouldn't solve anything. He had already spoken to the airline, and that was where he wanted the issue to stay. But not everyone saw it that way. Clara's name had been mentioned in the news reports, and soon she found herself under intense scrutiny. The airline's internal investigation had started, but the public response was growing. Some people defended her, arguing that she had simply been doing her job, trying to maintain order on the flight. Others, however, criticized her for not recognizing Marcus as an FBI agent and for acting hastily without knowing all the facts. Clara, once confident in her position, now found herself questioning everything. She had been suspended temporarily while the investigation continued, and it was clear that her career could be on the line. The weight of the situation was taking a toll on her. She had never imagined that a simple mistake could turn into such a public spectacle. One evening, Marcus received a call from Emily at the airline again. She sounded more serious this time. "Mr. King," Emily began, "I want to update you on the progress of the investigation. Clara has been cooperating fully, and we've had several meetings with her to discuss the events that took place. She's deeply regretful for what happened, and she realizes the gravity of the situation." Marcus listened quietly, unsure of how to respond. He had heard these words before, but he didn't want to hear just an apology. He wanted to make sure the right steps were being taken to prevent this from happening again. "We're also offering Clara additional training on how to handle situations involving law enforcement and federal agents," Emily continued. "We've realized there was a gap in the training process, and we're working to fix that." Marcus felt a sense of relief, but it was tempered with caution. It wasn't enough for Clara to simply apologize. She needed to understand how her actions had impacted him, and how they could have affected the entire situation. "I appreciate the update," Marcus said, "but I hope you understand that this is about more than just one mistake. It's about ensuring that this doesn't happen again." "I understand, Mr. King," Emily replied. "We're taking it seriously, and we're committed to making things right." As the call ended, Marcus leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to process everything. He had hoped the situation would be resolved quickly, but the fallout was bigger than he had imagined. Yet there was a part of him that felt relieved to know that the airline was making changes. It wasn't about getting revenge. It wasn't about making Clara pay for her mistake. It was about ensuring that mistakes like this wouldn't affect anyone else in the future. A week had passed since Marcus had filed his report with the FBI, and the airline had taken action. The story had faded from the media, but the tension from the incident still lingered. Marcus knew that it wasn't over yet. Clara's mistake had caused a ripple effect, and now the airline had to ensure this wouldn't happen again. The phone rang one afternoon, and Marcus picked it up to find Emily from the airline on the other end of the line. "Hello, Mr. King," she began. "I wanted to inform you that Clara is ready to speak with you. She has requested a meeting to personally apologize for the misunderstanding." Marcus had been expecting this. He knew it would come sooner or later. Clara had apologized to the airline and her colleagues, but this was different. This was personal. "I'll meet with her," Marcus replied. "I think it's important." The meeting was set for the following day, and Marcus wasn't sure what to expect. He had already made his peace with the situation. He wasn't angry anymore, but there was still a lingering sense of disappointment. Clara had acted without thinking, and that had cost him. But he understood that people made mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes led to important lessons. The next day, Marcus arrived at the airline's headquarters. He was escorted into a small conference room where Clara was already waiting. She looked nervous, her eyes shifting from side to side as she stood up to greet him. "Mr. King, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Clara said, her voice shaky. "I can't tell you how sorry I am for what happened. I made a huge mistake, and I regret it deeply." Marcus took a seat across from her. He wasn't sure what he expected, but her apology felt genuine. She wasn't the same confident person he had seen on the plane. This woman was remorseful, and for a moment, he could see the weight of what she had done in her eyes. "You were under a lot of pressure," Marcus said calmly. "I get it, but you didn't stop to ask the right questions. You didn't take the time to find out who I was before you made your decision." Clara nodded, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I acted out of frustration. I didn't even think about the possibility that you were an FBI agent. I saw someone who wasn't following the rules, and I overreacted." Marcus could see how much it hurt her to admit this. He could tell that she wasn't someone who typically made decisions like this. This had been a mistake, a huge one, but she had learned from it. "I understand," Marcus said softly, "and I appreciate that you're taking responsibility. But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again. It's about making sure that everyone on that plane feels safe and respected, no matter who they are." Clara nodded again, wiping her eyes. "I've already been through additional training, and I promise I won't make the same mistake again. I've learned so much from this, and I know I have to do better." Marcus could see that she truly meant it. The apology wasn't just words, it was a realization. Clara had learned that her actions, even in a stressful situation, had consequences. "Thank you for your apology," Marcus said. "It means a lot to me. I hope this experience helps you grow, and I hope it helps the airline improve its procedures." Clara smiled weakly, her shoulders relaxing a little. "It will. I've already shared what happened with my team, and we're all working to make sure something like this never happens again." The meeting ended on a positive note. As Marcus walked out of the room, he felt a sense of relief. The incident had been difficult for both of them, but it had also been a learning experience. He knew that Clara would never make the same mistake again, and that was all that mattered. Marcus got into his car and drove away, his mind finally at ease. The situation had been resolved, not with anger, but with understanding. And sometimes, that's all anyone really needed: to be heard, to be understood, and to have the opportunity to make things right. Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing his notes for the next case he had to work on. The incident with the airline felt like a distant memory now, but he knew it had changed things. It had been a wake-up call for everyone involved. The flight attendants, the airline, and even Marcus himself. It was a reminder of how easily things could spiral out of control when people jumped to conclusions. But it was also a reminder of the importance of patience and understanding. The phone on his desk rang, interrupting his thoughts. He picked it up and heard the familiar voice of Agent Daniels on the other end. "Marcus, I just got word that the airline has completed their review. They're making some changes to their training program, and it looks like they're taking this seriously. You were right to bring attention to it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "I'm glad they're making changes. This isn't just about me. It's about making sure something like this doesn't happen again. People need to understand how to handle these situations properly." "I agree," Daniels replied. "And Clara's been cleared to return to work, but with more training under her belt. She's learned a lot from this, and the airline is committed to making sure their staff is better prepared." "That's good to hear," Marcus said. "I'm not looking for any more trouble. I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page." After the call ended, Marcus felt a sense of peace. It was clear that the airline had taken the right steps to prevent future issues. Clara had learned from her mistake, and that was the most important part. Everyone was moving forward, and the situation had been resolved in the best way possible. Weeks passed, and the news about the incident eventually faded. Marcus continued his work at the FBI, dealing with cases and assignments that kept him busy. But every now and then, he thought back to that day on the plane. He remembered the frustration of being kicked off for no reason, but he also remembered the lesson he had learned. Sometimes, situations didn't play out the way you expected, and all you could do was adapt and move forward. One day, Marcus received a letter from the airline. It was addressed to him personally, and he opened it with curiosity. Inside was a handwritten note from Clara herself. "Mr. King," the note began, "I wanted to take one more moment to apologize for what happened on the plane. I know I made a mistake, and I've been working hard to learn from it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do better. I promise I will always take the time to listen and make sure I'm doing the right thing. I truly hope you're doing well, and I'm grateful for your understanding." Marcus smiled as he read the letter. It wasn't something he had expected, but it was something he appreciated. Clara had taken the time to write to him, and in that simple act, He could see the sincerity of her apology. She had learned, and that was all he had wanted from the start. As he sat back in his chair, Marcus felt a sense of closure. The incident had been difficult, but it had taught both him and Clara valuable lessons. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Everyone made mistakes, but it was how you learned from them that defined you. Clara had learned, and Marcus had too. The world moved on, but Marcus knew that he would carry the lessons of that experience with him. He understood now, more than ever, that even the smallest misunderstandings could have big consequences. But with patience, understanding, and a willingness to learn, those consequences didn't have to last forever.